Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today. So today we're doing a chat with Dr. Jessica Lee from West Village Veterinary. And just as a quick background about her, Dr. Lee is local to New Jersey, and she began pursuing her interests in veterinary science by majoring in animal science at Rutgers University. And then she went on to earn her DVM from University of Pennsylvania. And while she was there, she was studying genetic diseases affecting dogs. And Dr. Lee, I didn't actually know that when we invited you to be a speaker, but I feel like perhaps we can chat a little bit about that too, because that might be interesting in terms of what do these genetic tests tell us about preventative care? And then she also spent time abroad in China, training there. After she graduated, she did a small animal rotating internship, VERG, in Brooklyn. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for the nice introduction.
For those who submitted questions or topics, rather, thank you for doing that. It was super helpful to us and just kind of getting a sense in terms of what you all are interested in learning about. And what we did was we went ahead and identified 5 major themes in prevention. People were really interested in dental health, in mobility, supplements, senior dog care, and then diets and digestive health. Dr. Lee, it would be helpful to get a sense from your perspective, what do you think of as prevention? Is it the absence of disease for you or health at a certain age? It would be great to just kind of get a baseline from you.
I guess when I think of the term preventative care, I think of it as kind of just general wellness and then ideally prevention, as in like trying to early detection, essentially, right? In the end, there's some things that are going to happen no matter what we do, no matter what lifestyle our pets have. It's always going to be a genetic and environmental component that we just can't control. And things happen, like pets get sick, and whether it's something that's inherited or programmed in their DNA or an accident happens, unfortunately, those type of things do happen. And the whole point of preventative care, as in coming in for your wellness exam, is for us to hopefully either A, have a good baseline of what's normal for your pet. And so if and when something does happen, then we have that baseline to go off of. And it just makes our job a little bit easier if we already know what normal is for your pet versus abnormal. It's also just, and then as they get older, obviously we start recommending more tests like the screening tests and stuff. I'm sure your vet has already talked to you about running a heartworm test every year, running tick screenings when they're younger dogs. When they're older, we start recommending more extensive blood work. It's the same reason why you and I start going to a GP. I feel like when we're younger, we definitely don't go nearly as often. Like children, we go all the time. And then as young adults, we stop going for whatever reason until we have problems. And then we start going again, or we feel like, okay, maybe we haven't been to a doctor in a while, and then we start going again. And it's the same thing. Like as we age and get older, it's just statistics. Like the likelihood of us having some kind of issue is more likely. And it's the same case with your pets as well. It's the same reason why it's ideal. And I know not even every human person does this, but it's like ideally that you do get your checkup every year. And it's the same reason why your pets get their checkup every year. And that's what I think of like general preventative care, prevention.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I think we all wonder, do I really need to go for that physical? And I'm sure similarly for our pets, definitely important, like you said, to get that baseline to be able to see how things are evolving over time. Let's jump in. A topic that we got a ton of questions on was really the topic around mobility and specifically joints and back issues. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about that in terms of questions that we get asked on social media is a lot around arthritis. Specifically, people seem to hear that as a common one. And there's a lot of talk about, nail clipping and things that folks can do to prevent. I'm curious how much of that is absolutely 100% true or what other factors.
Oh yeah, mobility, joints, arthritis, things like that. These are things that I encounter on a regular basis. And it's not just my senior patients, it's my younger patients as well. And I think that this is something that can be difficult for us to diagnose because a lot of it is dependent on what the owner is observing at home. Basically, a lot of it is hard. It's hard for an owner to tell if their pet is truly uncomfortable or in pain per se versus this is just a behavioral thing, if they're just feeling off for whatever other reason, just because that's the whole thing with veterinary medicine is they can't talk to us. They can't talk to us. So that's what I kind of going back to the whole thing about preventative care is that with the physical exam, we have our baseline. We do our full physical from top to bottom, and you specify certain things that you're concerned about during that. We will try to hone in on those areas a little bit more. And then we take notes on that as well. And it's all part of the medical record. And then when you come back with your pet, hopefully only a year later for a wellness check versus a few months later or something for a sick visit, we have that kind of baseline to go off of. We can be like, okay, well, Dr. blah, blah, blah just saw your pet like a few months ago and they didn't notice any of this. Like any of this, we check things like range of motion of hips and knees. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen a vet do an orthopedic exam. It's a little bit more extensive than just the plain physical exam. And a lot of times we won't necessarily do an orthopedic specific exam unless it's indicated by what they're presenting for, or if that's a concern, or some of these insurance companies will actually ask us to perform a orthopedic exam on top of the physical exam for insurance purposes as well. It involves us really feeling all the joints and the legs, feeling the back, the neck, the tail. And even that in itself, it can be very difficult for us during the exam to truly assess how uncomfortable your pet is, because they're scared, they're nervous, they have no idea who I am, and a lot of times they're tense. And if their pain is not that significant, then unfortunately they're not going to show me during the physical exam. So a lot of times when I do detect it in my older patients, that's pretty far gone at that point. And that's the other thing about pets in general, is that they're just very good at hiding pain and hiding discomfort. And so that's why a lot of times people don't notice what's happening until all of a sudden they realize, wait, Fluffy can't really jump on the bed anymore, or they're really having a hard time with the stairs. It just seems very dramatic, the change, just because I do feel like they kind of really hold on and keep it in until they're really not feeling good about it all the time. So I do think that's something definitely people should be aware of in general. And then this kind of can cross over into the supplements. And some of the questions I saw on the list were all senior prevention, like senior care, like supplements and things that you can give them to help. And I do think mobility joint supplements is a huge thing that doesn't hurt, right? It's something that doesn't hurt. You don't know if your dog's going to get arthritis, but especially any large breed dog, any dog that's going to be pretty much 50 plus pounds, I would start them on joint supplements when they're honestly as young as like 3 to 4 years old, because that's when arthritis starts. Arthritis starts when they're only a couple years old. And they may not be showing any signs of it at that point in time, but it is something that eventually will always progress. And then if you start them on these supplements a little bit earlier, then potentially you could slow it down. And then it's the same thing with people as well with arthritis. Like a lot of it is just weight, restricting their weight as well. Like a lot of these long back dogs, like dachshunds, corgis, those kind of breeds, I'll tell people like you really should keep them slim because they tend to have back problems. Big dogs, another one I saw was tearing their cruciate ligaments or their like the dog ACL essentially. That's another thing, like keeping them fit, keeping them slim. These are things that you can do to kind of help prevent these type of injuries from happening. Obviously, nothing is ever a guarantee. You just kind of set yourself up for the best type of possibility. It's just like with people, right? It's like you can eat organic, vegetarian, whatever you think is the ideal healthy diet. You can exercise every day, but unfortunately, like things still happen. You do the best that you can to set yourself up for success. And that's the same thing with your pets as well.
That's really interesting because I do think, especially with specific breeds, larger dogs, like what you mentioned about starting that early, I don't know if that awareness exists. And I'll just ask for a personal reason. What about the small dogs as well?
I mean, small dogs definitely get arthritis as well. It goes a little bit more under the radar. When your small dog starts to have mobility issues, you can always pick them up, right? Like you can put them in your stroller, you can put them in your bag. It's like an issue, but also a non-issue. I'm not saying that they're not feeling any pain or anything like that, but it hits the larger dogs, like in terms of their actual quality of life, a lot harder for sure. But but there are definitely smaller dogs. So for example, I don't remember if Ella has this issue, but the luxating patellas, it's a very common thing we see in small breed dogs. So essentially in like Pomeranians, Yorkies, Chihuahuas, like any of these Maltese, like really tiny dogs. I don't know if you guys have one or you've seen them like running around on the street, like you'll see they skip a lot. They kind of like, they're like trotting along, they seem fine, and they'll kind of just like skip sometimes or shake out their leg. This is a very common question I get, especially for younger dogs. And a lot of times it's because they have this congenital condition called a luxating patella. Basically, your patella is your kneecap. and it sits in a groove in the bone. And basically it's only ever supposed to go up and down, right? When you bend and flex your knee. But in these smaller breed dogs, the groove is very shallow. So there are different grades of this luxating patella, but essentially it luxates, or it moves. It shifts outside that groove. So it moves left to right, essentially, which is not what it's supposed to do at all. So it's essentially a loose kneecap. The vast majority of dogs I see it in, it's very mild. They just kind of skip hop here once in a while, and then they're like totally fine, and it doesn't affect them in the long term. But there are certain dogs that they can develop secondary arthritis to it eventually. Like if it's a more severe form of it, they actually need surgical correction, which we try to hold off on that as long as possible. But those type of dogs, I will also start them on joint supplements as well at a young age, just because I can't predict the future. Like I can't tell you if your dog's going to end up having an issue with this 5 years from now versus your dog will be totally fine without any sort of intervention. So that's a small dog specific thing. And even those back dogs I was talking about, the long back dogs, they tend to be smaller dogs. They're not necessarily big dogs either. So weight is definitely something that's another key thing as well. I know we love giving our pets treats and spoiling them and giving them all the goods and stuff like that, but keeping them slim is definitely to their benefit, especially when it comes to orthopedics.
Thank you. We got a question regarding young dogs. Are fitness exercises a good preventative for a young dog with no known mobility issues to keep them fit?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially anything that burns calories for them. Like dogs, I feel like are just inherently energetic and they want to be active, and then they do eventually become more sedentary as they age. I'm sure of that. But even just throwing the ball, taking them on a longer walk, just really trying to implement. I mean, it's hard for me to say like, oh, your dog needs at least 1 hour of exercise 5 days a week. There's not too much formula in terms of that. I also hate telling clients that because I don't want to make a busy person seem like they're not taking good care of their dog because they're not able to exercise their dog an hour every day. It's just kind of what's realistic for your lifestyle and them. And then if they're gaining weight, then that means you're not exercising them enough, and you're like, it's a combination of the exercise and also overfeeding. So it's finding that right click. And it's the same thing with people as well, right? Like some people gain weight very easily. Some dogs gain weight very easily, and it's very hard for them to lose weight. And then some dogs, no matter what you feed them, they seem to self-regulate and they don't get that skinny, or they're just inherently active. And so they're able to keep the weight off on their own. But the vast majority of the time, I would say the culprit of overweight dogs is from overfeeding.
I think that's a hard one. And the pandemic made that one really, really hard.
Yes. And then I totally get it. Tons of treats out there. And obviously dogs, especially these rescues, they'll take whatever you give them. They're just endless little garbage disposals, basically. So, and they love it. And I know that's how some people show their love to their pet. It's a balance.
Yeah, definitely. We do have a quick follow-up, and then I'd like to move to the next topic. So around the fitness exercises, the question was really regarding mobility exercises to strengthen. I'm not sure if there's a specific name, but I've seen trainers use different pods to have the dog stand on.
Oh, I've seen that. I'm not like an expert in terms of specific physical therapy. That's something you're interested in, then I would highly recommend going to a physical therapy place. The Animal Medical Center has one, and then also Water for Dogs in Tribeca. They're another facility that offers things like that. And these are more geared towards specifically what's going on with your dog. But yes, there's tons of strengthening exercises. Like they stand on, they have like they're like the rubber, they look like yoga balls, but they're like half of a yoga ball, and they kind of like those things, and they kind of do balancing, things like that. They have you do stuff where you literally like bend and flex their legs for them, and then you do range of motion, things like that. There's definitely specific exercise you can look at. I mean, I'm sure you could Google these things as well, but because obviously I know physical therapy is not inexpensive. If you can swing it, they have the underwater treadmills, and then also pools. So like swimming is amazing for your dog if they're into it, right? Like not every dog likes water either. So just like with people, it's really good for your joints and really excellent for strength training, especially if they're already having issues with arthritis and it's hard for you to get the exercise in. But even just walking around, but that's something I would specifically seek out a physical therapist for. And I can see someone quoted someone that I personally haven't heard of, but I'm sure that's fine. That doesn't mean that it's not good. I mean,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Diane. Awesome. So let's move on to supplements, because I think we already touched upon that a little bit. I guess we do get marketed supplements for dogs who are like as young as puppies, and then obviously all the way to being a senior dog or a very senior dog. When are supplements most effective, and are there any favorites that you always recommend across the board?
In terms of supplements, I always put it out there. It's the same thing as human supplements. It's just a very highly unregulated part marketing. You know what I mean? There's a lot of marketing involved. For the most part, I generally think most supplements are pretty harmless to give. But if they actually help, that's really what the question is. And in terms of dog supplements, in terms of the supplements that I tend to recommend, I keep it pretty basic. I know there's a ton of brands. Most recently, I don't know, just in the last year, but people have been getting supplement recommendations from TikTok. I hear that all the time during my appointments. Have you heard of this TikTok supplement? I actually don't have TikTok, so no. But that's where people are getting their information from now. It's social media. And anyway, for younger pets, I tend to start a lot of them on fish oil. So that's something that's pretty simple. I would recommend an actual veterinary fish oil product, like for dogs. Like I know obviously that's another thing. People love to be like, oh, I take that too. I'll just give it to my dog. I would really try to buy a product that's actually made for your pet and not try to just share, because the dosing is different. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of xylitol toxicity, but it's essentially like sugar-free gum, but they use it in a lot of flavoring in general. So that's something that we've seen in some supplements and stuff that are meant for humans, but are actually toxic for animals. And if you want to know, it's XYLITOL is the spelling of xylitol. So if that's something you see on the list of ingredients, that's not something you should be giving your dog. So definitely that's one thing I would really ask people to do, is really try to seek the actual animal version of the product if you're going to be giving them any sort of supplement. But fish oil is really great. And then my other go-to is probiotics. I know there's a ton of probiotics out there, and the ones that we recommend are the ones that we obviously sell in our practice. We try to supply the supplements that are actually have some sort of studies and science based. So my two kind of go-to probiotic brands are ProViable and Fortiflora. So those are the ones that I know are definitely backed, because a lot of times you buy these probiotics and the bacteria is dead, honestly. Or if you try to give them human probiotics, it's different. They don't have the same bacteria that we do. So it's not really doing anything. Like I said, it's probably not harming your animal, but it's probably not doing anything either. I know people like to give yogurt to their pets. I don't know if it's really doing anything, but as long as it's not giving them diarrhea, then I'm not against it either. And I know goat's milk was another thing I was hearing people were adding to their pets. There's tons of stuff out there, but generally the two brands that I like for probiotics are the Fortiflora and the ProViable. And then I guess like the third kind of supplement that I recommend is like kind of going back to our previous topic is basically joint supplements. Glucosamine, that's the big active ingredient in a lot of these joint supplements that's kind of what we look for. So the big brands that we tend to like are Adequan and Cosequin. These are all over-the-counter products, so you don't have to buy them through a vet just because your vet sells them. So those are kind of the two that I really like. And then the other joint supplement that is gaining more ground is like green lip mussel extract. And there's a couple of brands out there that have that as well. In terms of the general brands that offer supplements that we tend to like, the big brands are Veterinary Science is one. They're just like a huge umbrella. They have a bunch of anxiety supplements, liver supplements, veterinary recommended solutions. That's another brand that I tend to like too, just because, like I said, because they have some sort of study, science-based like testing done to these supplements. Hopefully they're actually at least being absorbed, the ingredients that they're having in there.
Is there a rule of thumb that you apply or recommend to people like to think about when they're thinking about whether to give a new supplement or not? Like I know you recommended Veterinary Science and Veterinary Recommended Solutions because I guess they're doing studies and you know that there is data behind that. And so when we are being marketed on TikTok, which is unfortunate, and I think whether for good or bad, I guess it's a way to create awareness, but also unnecessary expenditure. And I don't know about the side effects, but is there a rule of thumb that people can apply next time you see a TikTok video or an Instagram reel to just think about whether it's necessary? Or is it just that talk to your veterinarian?
I think the easiest thing to do is just ask your veterinarian if it's safe to give you. Like, that's really what it comes down to. And that's as easy as taking a picture or sending ingredient lists, essentially. And so we can do a quick scan of it. And, I'll be honest, I won't necessarily know what every ingredient is in there, but I will be able to recognize at least what's not good and what's bad and what your pet should probably not be taking. That's kind of what the conversation has been like during these appointments. Oh, it was on TikTok and there's a supplement, I've been giving it to my pet. And I'd be like, okay, well, let me see the ingredients, because I'm not going to know every single supplement under the sun. Like, what it comes down to is a lot of times these supplements do well. It's purely anecdotal. So like I said, like, I'm sure it does help some pets and it does things, but a lot of times most of them don't have the data to support that. If I have a client that wants to give all sorts of different vitamins and supplements and things like that to their dogs, as long as they're not having issues or problems with it, like I tend to not recommend any sort of general multivitamin or anything for pets. Like, there's no such thing as like a Centrum for dogs, basically. As they get older, there's obviously specific supplements for specific things. So that goes back to kind of our wellness exams, our checkups, why we start recommending things like blood work, especially when they hit kind of what we call the geriatric middle age. I know people don't like to hear us call their pets geriatric when they're only 7 years old, but unfortunately that's the scientific cutoff term for that. And that's when we'll start recommending blood work. And then when we start seeing things like, oh, a liver enzyme's kind of going up, or kidneys, things like that, all about the early detection, then we will start recommending other types of supplements as well. There's like urinary supplements, kidney ones, liver, there's all sorts of ones that I could name. Those, like I said, are for specific animals in specific situations, not necessarily like a catch-all for everyone. I think in the end, it's really just feeding them like balanced, good quality diet is the best you can do in terms of, if they're eating a well-balanced quality diet, then I think supplements shouldn't be needed.
I think we did get a few questions around that. And one that particularly stood out to me was around the prescription diets. Is this actually required, or is this just a way for pet companies to make money? And I mean, I don't blame them for being suspicious. We're getting marketed all sorts of stuff now, like grain-free diet and this and that, and it's really confusing. So your thoughts on that?
Nutrition in general is a very controversial topic, and I think a lot of that trickles down from the human side. This is the conversation I always have for people. It's, you hear about all these fads, these trends, these claims about all sorts of different diet fads, right? On the human side, gluten-free. Oh, like I have to cut everything out and bring things in and can only eat organic, or I should eat a Mediterranean diet, like paleo, keto. There's obviously a million different ways people think that they should be feeding themselves, right? And what they term as healthy. A lot of these kind of terms, they will trickle over to the veterinary side. What I don't like, and I know this is going to probably upset some people, but I don't love it when people tell me they only home cook for their dogs and they're not following an actual recipe made by a veterinary nutritionist. This is the conversation I have with every client, especially if they bring up the food conversation with me, is that I say that the pet food industry is $1 billion market, and everybody wants a piece of the pie. There's going to be a lot of random diets that are being marketed to you with, once again, not a lot of research and science behind it. They don't do food trials. They don't have an actual veterinary nutritionist on staff, or they say that they consult with one. You don't really know how involved that they really are, even if they're actually formulating the recipes, or they're just sending them and they're like, all right, that looks okay. But I know a lot of people don't like, obviously, like kibble, canned food, wet food. I know that there's been like a whole movement away from that. People want to feed their dogs human grade ingredients, fresh food, whole ingredients. And that's what ends up being why people end up doing the home cooking. And I know obviously there's a lot of these fresh food retailers that have gained more popularity as well, like Farmer's Dog, Ollie's, Just Food for Dogs. Those are kind of the bigger ones that I get. And I think there's a few others that Nom Nom, I think, is another. Like I said, there's a lot out there. Obviously, I know those brands are more expensive. So if you are going to be home cooking, then there are some good websites out there that offer free recipes as your dog doesn't have any issues. And one of it is balanceit.com. And they actually sell it's a website that's made purely by veterinary nutritionists based out of UC Davis. and they actually sell a supplement that you can blend into the recipes that they make. So that you're feeding a well-balanced diet for your dog, and also they're receiving all the vitamins and nutrients that they should be receiving if they were feeding them like a typical kibble diet, basically. Because that's in the end like what the benefit of these kibble diets are, is that it's the consistency of it. So that's why people take all these supplements and vitamins, and right, because we don't eat the same thing every day, right? We eat what we want. We have some people who eat pizza all the time, and we people only eat salad. And so you're not getting, like, not everybody is getting that full, well-rounded diet that they're getting. If you are, kudos to you. Like, I know I don't eat that healthy. So that's why we kind of look to supplements to bring back like what we're not getting from our food. But if your pet is getting fed, for the most part, pets are being fed the same thing every day. Otherwise, they're honestly probably having diarrhea a lot. And so that consistency in itself, as long as it's consistently a well-balanced diet, nutritionally balanced diet, then generally they shouldn't need any supplementation.
Yeah, it's interesting because of what you said about us, our lifestyle choices influence our pets.
No,
Right?
absolutely. I have lots of vegan, vegetarian clients that insist that their dogs need to also be vegan and vegetarian. I've had kosher. I've had to like look through ingredients, make sure there wasn't pork, canned food that I was recommending, just because they're kosher, so they want their pets to be kosher. So it's very individualized. But I guess going back to your question about the prescription diets, so the veterinary diets, in my opinion, yes, there are wellness ones, and those honestly, I do think that's just like a marketing thing. Like, I don't think a veterinary wellness diet is any better than the one that you can get from Chewy or Purina or Petco, whatever. But when we start recommending these prescription diets, it's once again, it's the same thing as what I was saying. As they get older or as they develop certain issues, these diets are study-based, science-based, to cater towards your dog's specific ailment. That is definitely not a marketing ploy. That is something that we're recommending because these diets are supposed to help slow down or potentially improve whatever issue they may or may not be having. I always warn people that a lot of these prescription diets aren't the yummiest, meaning that if you have a picky eater of a dog, a lot of them won't eat it. But luckily now, a lot of these fresh food ingredients, made to order ones like Just Food for Dogs, another one is 9 in Line. They're all backed by veterinarians, and they have created some more palatable or tasty. Obviously, they're going to be more expensive because in the end, it's fresh food being delivered to you. But they have offered some options as well that you could feed your dog.
I think we got 2 questions. Do you support a raw diet? Feel free to give a monosyllabic answer. Yes,
Okay.
no.
I guess there's 2 ways to look at raw diet. If you're talking about raw, as in like literally going to the supermarket, buying your pet like a piece of raw chicken or raw meat, no. That is not, I do not support that. And I definitely have had clients that swear that ever since they switched their dog to raw, their dog has been fine. And for me, nutrition, unless your dog is having issues, I really don't fight clients about it. I kind of give them my mini opinion about, I just said about ideally they should be on a well-balanced diet, maybe sugar to balance it, at least give them a vitamin supplement. If they're really adamant about feeding that to their dog and their dog is otherwise fine, then I just kind of let it be. The reason why I don't support those type of raw diets is the same reason why you and I don't eat a piece of raw meat from Whole Foods, is because there's bacteria and it can cause contamination, and that's why we cook our food. So it's the same reason why I recommend cooking your food for your pet. In terms of those raw treated diets, Stella and Chewy's, I forgot a couple of other brands. Instinct, I think, is one of them. They're marketed as raw treated, like they're raw, and I guess they're like flash frozen or something in some way. The only issue that I have with those diets is there's another marketing thing out there about feeding your dog high protein. So there's this whole mentality trying to convince people that their domesticated cat or dog is a wild animal, and that's why you should feed them like they're wild animals. Like your dog is actually a wolf, or your cat is like, I think the bag I see, there's like a lynx or something on it. So that's like a whole other thing. And I think that's where like the whole raw stuff comes from as well. And the same thing, your dog's eating Stella Chewy's, they love it. They really love it. It's very tasty and they eat it. And that's why people like it too. Because in the end, it's not just about what's nutritionally balanced and healthy for your dog. It's what your dog's going to eat. And if your dog doesn't eat what's healthy for them, then you're going to give them what they want to eat, right? If your dog is doing fine on those diets, then I don't have an issue with it. But obviously, if they are having an issue, then that's when I'm going to start really pushing for the diets that I recommend. And I prefer to see if it's really a dietary issue related to your whatever issue your dog may be having. So.
Thank you. Any closing thoughts about prevention, like something that you wish people would talk to you more about, or something that you want people to take away as like the most important thing?
I think the one thing I really want to drive home kind of from the beginning is the physical exam, because I feel like people don't value that in any way, especially like you get your card in the mail and you say, Fluffy's due for your rabies shot, right? And then people call and then they want to they just want the vaccine. They don't want anything else. If people have financial concerns, I totally understand like why you don't always want to pay whatever exam fee, right? Because that's usually an extra $100, let's just say, depending on where you go see your vet. And like I said, there really is value in that. The physical exam, it's a way for a medical professional to basically check in an objective way and see how your pet is doing on an annual or semi-annual basis. And that's kind of like going back to that baseline that I was talking about. In terms of the testing and things like that, like obviously we recommend those for a reason. It's all for screening purposes to try to catch things before they become an issue. You know, obviously, like I said, they get expensive, things tend to add up, but the bare minimum thing that I would really would like clients to value more is the actual physical exam that we do for your pet.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really important reminder. And thank you so much. This was super helpful, so informative. I hope we can have you back to talk more about some of these topics. This gives you a good starting point to have conversations with your veterinarian, but also as consumer choices for your pet, because it's important to, at least I think for human health, we're told prevention is better than cure. And I think that applies to our dogs as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, and thanks everyone for joining.